Hello, this is Dan with Orbital Guitars, and welcome to part 1 of my GGBO2022 build. So, because I entered the Professionals category of the Great Guitar Build-Off 2022, that means this guitar is going to be raffled off once it's done. Now, that raffle is going to run from the 10th of December to the 31st of December. At the time of recording, I'm not entirely sure which site that's going to be run through, so be sure to check back this video or any other video in this series, and I should have a link in the description and in a pinned comment that will show you where you can go in order to enter that raffle. Now I'm starting by preparing the wood for the fretboard. For this build I'm using a piece of Bocote. Is it pronounced Bocote? Bocote? I don't know, but either way it's a very unique smelling wood, almost soapy in a way. The first thing I need to do with it is to split the thickness of the piece because it started out more than double the thickness of a fretboard. I split it on the bandsaw, then use a jig on my spindle sander to thickness sand it down close to its final size. From there I go to my miter saw and fretting jig to cut the fret slots, giving this board a 25-inch scale length. With the fret slots all cut, I use a hand saw to cut away the excess above the nut and below the 24th fret. I'll use one of these offcuts to make the truss rod cover later. Next I'm going to work on the neck blank. I'll start by drilling the endpoints of the truss rod channel, then route the channel using a handheld router with a guide fence attachment that will allow me to route the channel perfectly straight. I'll also route for a truss rod access at the same time. Once the channel is routed to depth, I need to widen the headstock end of it so that the truss rod nut will fit. I do this by marking the width and then remove the necessary material with a couple of chisels. Now I clamp the fretboard into place on the neck blank and drill a couple of holes that will be used for locating pins when I glue it on. But before I glue the fretboard, I need to cut the neck blank closer to its final size and shape. This particular rosewood board is going to be made into two full necks, so I need to be very careful not to cut into any important parts and just separate the two. With the neck blank cut down, I can now drill for the truss rod access, which is made much easier by the routing I did earlier. And then I'm ready to glue on the fretboard. First, I cover the truss rod channel with some masking tape in order to keep any glue from getting into it. After which I'll spread on the glue and insert the locating pins, not necessarily in that order. Then I will set the fretboard into place using the locating pins and then snip away the pokey ends of the pins before setting the neck on a clamping caul and clamping it up. After the glue is dry, I go back to the bandsaw and rough cut the neck taper. I will then refine the neck taper to its final dimensions with a straight-edged routing template and a flush-cutting router bit. The edge grain on that Bocote is pretty wild in places. I'm going to work on the inlay now while the fretboard is still flat. First I cut out the inlay pieces according to a design template. This inlay is done in mother of pearl. Once the pieces are all cut to shape, I will glue them down to a piece of masking tape that is laid over the 12th thread of the fretboard, then use a very sharp knife to cut around each piece, marking out the exact material that I need to remove for the inlay. After that is done, I use a small 3/32 router bit in my Dremel with its precision router base attachment to route the bulk of the material. After which I will use a small chisel to get into the little corners that the router bit left round. and then I flood the inlay space with super glue and set each of the inlay pieces into place. For the most part, the inlay pieces were sitting nearly flush with the surface of the fretboard, but that still means that I needed to sand away a little off the top to make it all totally flush before I can put in the radius. So I'll do that with a leveling beam with some 80 grit sandpaper on it. With the inlay done, I can now radius the fretboard. I do this entirely with a radius block, which for this build is a 14-inch radius. Once the board is radiused, I use a handsaw to recut the fret slots to the appropriate depth for the fret tangs. At this point I noticed that the end of one of the inlay wings was a bit thin, nearly sanded through, so I routed away a small piece of it and inlaid a new piece of mother of pearl. After that, I drill for the side dots, then glue them in and cut and scrape away the excess. The last few bits of preparation before installing the frets, I use a small triangular file to bevel the tops of the fret slots. I also use my Dremel again with its smallest bit to widen the fret slots where the mother of pearl is so that it doesn't crack or break when the frets are hammered in. And finally, it's time for fretting. This guitar is getting a set of narrow, tall stainless steel frets. Now my process for stainless steel frets is this. 1. Cut the segments of fret wire using regular wire cutters. This will make your flush cutting fret nippers last longer. 2. Use fret tang nippers to remove the tang at the ends of each fret. 3. File away any little bits of tang at the end of the fret that the nippers didn't remove. 4. Hammer the fret into place. 5. Use flush cutting fret nippers to remove the excess at each end. Rinse and repeat 23 more times. Once all the frets are in, I file the ends of the frets flush with the edges of the neck and put in the bevel at the end of each fret. this point I use superglue and dust from the fretboard wood to fill in the ends of the fret slots. The superglue will also flood its way underneath the entire fret and fill any air gaps that might be in there. This also has the added benefit of securing all the frets in place so that you don't have to worry about any of them lifting out of the fret slots while leveling them. Then I'll do an initial fret end dressing just to take away any sharp corners so that I don't cut my hands while I'm working on the neck. I'll do a final fret end dressing after they've been leveled and recrowned. As a way of putting off the tedious part of the fretwork, I decided to shape the end of the fretboard. I like to give them a simple but decorative rounded concave shape. At this point, I carve the neck profile using the faceting method, where I carve away a series of ever smaller facets until the neck is nearly round, then do some final shaping by feel. After the carving is done, I use the notched straight edge to make sure that the neck itself is still straight and make any necessary truss rod adjustments before leveling the frets. In this case, the neck had a slight natural back bow that needed to be adjusted. And then it's on to fret leveling. Even though it's not technically necessary, I like to tape off the fretboard at this point for various reasons. Like that. On an ebony fretboard, a little Sharpie would be unnoticeable, but on this pale colored fretboard, a green Sharpie mark would have been disastrous. That said, I also can use the tape as a way to mark any particular high or low spots on the frets. I like to use a fret leveling file on stainless steel frets because I find that it does the job more efficiently than sandpaper on a leveling beam. I also like to use the StuMax Z file for most of the crowning of stainless steel frets because it doesn't clog as much or get dulled as much as traditional fret crowning files when working with stainless steel, but I still use the traditional file to make fine adjustments to the crowning. After crowning, it's on to polishing. I start with 220 grit sandpaper, follow it with 320, then fine and superfine buffing discs on my Dremel. Then it's steel wool to clean away residue from the buffing discs and raise the polish even more. And finally, I use an automotive buffing compound and foam buffing pad in my large random orbital sander to make the frets super shiny. All that's left then is to remove the masking tape, which brings us to the end of part 1 of my GGBO2022 build. Social media links are in the description, as well as my business email and a link to my Reverb shop where you can find any of my guitars that are currently up for sale, and some guitar body design routing templates for those who may be interested in building their own versions of my designs. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you for the next installment.